The gunshot echoed across the rolling plains as Zara Ramirez watched the last of the bandits flee, their silhouettes disappearing into the horizon like shadows chased by dawn. It was the summer of 1878, and at 26, Zara had just become a widow for the second time in the unforgiving territory of western Colorado. Her husband of 8 months, Miguel, lay still beside the well that had been their salvation and ultimately his demise. The bandits had wanted water, then their horses, then everything else. Miguel had refused, and now Zara was alone again. She buried him with hands that had grown accustomed to the weight of a shovel, beside a crude wooden marker that would soon join the countless others scattered across the frontier. 2 husbands in 3 years the West didn't just take, it devoured. 3 days passed as Zara waited by the well, her supplies dwindling to almost nothing. The small homestead Miguel had built sat 100 yards away, but she couldn't bring herself to return to it. Instead, she stayed, rationing the last of her jerky and cornbread, drinking sparingly from the well that had cost Miguel his life. The noon sun beat down mercilessly, and hunger gnawed at her insides. She had to make a decision: soon try to make it to the nearest town 60 miles away, or wait for the unlikely chance that someone would pass by. On the 4th day, as the sun began its descent, and Zara's hope along with it, a figure appeared on the horizon. At first she thought it might be a mirage, a trick of the light and her desperate mind. But as the silhouette grew larger, taking the shape of a man on horseback, Zara realized salvation might be at hand, or perhaps another threat. She reached for Miguel's revolver, tucked into the folds of her skirt, and waited. The rider approached slowly, leading a second horse laden with supplies. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. His clothes were dusty but not ragged, and his horse was well kept, suggesting he wasn't a drifter or outlaw. "Madam," he called from a respectful distance, tipping his hat. "Name's Tucker Ziegler. I don't mean to intrude, but it looks like you might be in some trouble." Zara kept the revolver hidden but ready. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Ziegler?" "I run cattle about 15 miles east of here. Was tracking some strays when I saw smoke from your chimney a few days back. Figured I'd check if everything was all right." His eyes drifted to the fresh grave beside the well. "I can see now it's not." "Bandits," Zara said simply. 4 days ago." Tucker dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that. Have you got family nearby, anyone I can take you to?" Zara shook her head. "No family." "Not anymore." Tucker nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "If you don't mind me saying, madam, you look like you could use some food and rest. I've got provisions I'd be happy to share." Zara hesitated. Trust came at a premium in these parts, but hunger was a powerful motivator. "I'd be grateful for the food," she said finally. Tucker approached the well, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He drew water for his horses, then offered to refill Zara's canteen. As he worked the rope and pulley, Zara noticed the careful precision of his movements, the way he seemed to respect the well and what it represented. "Your husband build this well?" Tucker asked, handing her the filled canteen. "My first husband started it," Zara replied. "Miguel, my second, finished it last spring." Tucker nodded, understanding etched in the lines of his face. "That's good work. A reliable well is more valuable than gold out here." They sat in the shade of the lone cottonwood tree near the well, sharing a meal of dried beef, beans, and hardtack. Tucker didn't ask questions, and Zara appreciated his silence. There was a quietness about him that felt reassuring rather than threatening. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Tucker finally spoke. "Mrs. Ramirez," Zara supplied. "Zara Ramirez." "Mrs. Ramirez, night's coming and it's not safe for you to stay out here alone. I'd be happy to escort you to town tomorrow, or if you prefer, my ranch isn't far. My sister Caroline lives there too. You'd have proper company." Zara considered her options. Town meant starting over again, facing pitying looks and whispers, but this stranger's ranch posed its own uncertainties. Why would you help me, Mr. Ziegler? You don't know me. Tucker's eyes, the color of storm clouds, met hers. Out here, we help each other or we perish. That's the only law that matters. There was truth in his words, a simple philosophy born of necessity. Zara had seen both the best and worst of humanity on the frontier, those who helped without question and those who took without mercy. I'll go to town, she decided. But first, I need to gather some things from the house. Tucker nodded. I'll make camp here and wait. We'll leave at first light. As Zara walked back to the small cabin that had been her home, she felt Tucker's eyes on her back, not in threat but in protection. For the first time in 4 days, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. The cabin was just as she had left it, a half-prepared meal still sitting on the table, Miguel's shirt draped over a chair. Zara moved methodically, gathering only what was essential. Clothing, a few sentimental items, Miguel's pocket watch, and the small pouch of coins they had saved. Everything else would remain, a monument to another life cut short. When she returned to the well, Tucker had set up a modest camp. A small fire crackled, and he had laid out a bedroll for her at a respectful distance from his own. I hope this is suitable, Mrs. Ramirez, he said, gesturing to the arrangement. It's fine, thank you, Zara replied, placing her bundle beside the bedroll. They sat by the fire as night descended fully, bringing with it a blanket of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Tucker told her about his ranch, modest but growing, with plans for expansion come spring. He had come west 5 years earlier, after the war left him with little taste for his former life in Pennsylvania. And your sister came with you? Zara asked, curious about the woman who might soon provide her temporary shelter. Caroline followed 2 years later after her husband died of typhoid. She had nowhere else to go, and I had more space than I needed. Tucker poked at the fire. Family's important out here. Sometimes it's all we have, Zara nodded, thinking of her own lack of family. Her parents had died before she left Missouri, and she had no siblings. Her first husband, Thomas, had brought her west with promises of a better life, only to die of a rattlesnake bite 6 months after they arrived. Miguel had been a neighbor who offered marriage as much for practical reasons as affection. Now he too was gone. Do you have children, Mrs. Ramirez? Tucker asked. No, Zara replied, the single word carrying the weight of multiple disappointments. It seems God had other plans. Tucker nodded, respecting the boundary her tone established. Get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully to Zara that night. She woke several times, startled by the memory of gunshots or the imagined sound of approaching horses. Each time she found Tucker awake, either tending the fire or sitting vigilant, his rifle across his lap. His presence was comforting in a way she hadn't expected. At dawn, they broke camp quickly. Tucker helped Zara secure her belongings to the spare horse, a gentle mare he called Daisy. As they prepared to leave, Zara paused at Miguel's grave, saying a silent goodbye to yet another chapter of her life. Would you like a moment alone? Tucker asked, sensing her need. No, Zara said firmly. There's nothing left to say. They rode eastward, the rising sun at their backs casting long shadows ahead of them. Tucker set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of information about the territory. Zara appreciated his attempts at casual conversation, though her responses remained brief. Around midday, they stopped by a small creek to rest the horses and eat. Tucker spread a clean bandana on a flat rock and laid out their simple meal, more dried beef, some hard cheese, and the last of the hardtack. Town's about 4 hours' ride from here, he said as they ate. There's a decent boarding house where you can stay until you decide what's next. Zara nodded, though the thought of being alone in a strange town filled her with dread. What's the town like? Silverdale's small but growing. Got a general store, a bank, church, school? The usual. Some good folks there. Tucker paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. If you don't mind me asking, what are your plans? Zara stared at the creek, watching water flow over smooth stones. I don't know, she admitted. I have some money saved. Enough for a few months at a boarding house while I look for work. Beyond that, she trailed off, the future a blank page she couldn't bring herself to contemplate. Tucker was quiet for a moment, then spoke hesitantly. My offer still stands, Mrs. Ramirez. There's plenty of room at the ranch and Caroline would welcome the company. You could stay until you get your bearings, decide what's next. No expectations. The offer was tempting, more tempting than Zara wanted to admit. A ranch with people who weren't strangers seemed infinitely preferable to a boarding house in an unfamiliar town. But she had already relied on 2 men for her survival, and both had left her alone. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ziegler, but I wouldn't want to impose. Tucker's expression remained neutral, though Zara thought she detected a hint of disappointment. It's no imposition, but I understand your caution. The offer remains open should you change your mind. They continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing from open plains to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. As they rode, Zara found herself studying Tucker Ziegler more closely. He had the quiet confidence of a man comfortable with solitude but not defined by it. His hands, calloused and strong, handled the reins with gentle precision. There was kindness in his eyes, but also a sadness she recognized, the mark of someone who had seen more of life's hardships than its joys. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Silverdale sprawled in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered homesteads surrounding it. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance, Zara could see people moving about their business. There it is, Tucker said, stopping to let her take in the view. Not much to look at, but it's a decent place. As they descended toward the town, a strange reluctance settled over Zara. The closer they got to Silverdale, the more final her decision felt. Once Tucker left her at the boarding house, she would truly be on her own again. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. Tucker led them to a 2-story building with a sign that read, Mrs. Whitman's boarding house. He dismounted and helped Zara down, his hands steady and respectful at her waist. I'll speak to Mrs. Whitman about a room for you, he said, tying the horses to a hitching post. Zara nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the noise and bustle of the town after days of isolation. Thank you, Mr. Ziegler, for everything. Tucker tipped his hat and disappeared inside the boarding house, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts. She looked around at the unfamiliar faces, the busy street, the life continuing as if the world hadn't shattered just days ago. How many times could a person start over before there was nothing left to rebuild with? A few minutes later, Tucker emerged with a stern-looking woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Mrs. Ramirez, this is Mrs. Whitman, Tucker introduced. She has a room available. Mrs. Whitman's expression softened slightly as she took in Zara's appearance. Mr. Ziegler explained your situation, my dear. I'm very sorry for your loss. The room is small but clean and meals are included in the weekly rate. Thank you, Zara said, forcing a smile. That sounds perfect. Mrs. Whitman excused herself to prepare the room, leaving Zara and Tucker alone again. Well, Tucker said, shifting slightly, I suppose this is where we part ways. Zara nodded, surprised by the tightness in her throat. Yes, I can't thank you enough for your help, Mr. Ziegler. Tucker reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. I wrote down directions to my ranch just in case. It's about 3 hours' ride northeast of here. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything at all, you send word to Tucker Ziegler. Someone will know how to find me. Zara took the paper, their fingers brushing briefly. I will. Tucker helped her unload her belongings from Daisy, carrying them inside to the modest room Mrs. Whitman had prepared. The space was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. It's nice, Zara said, though the walls already felt like they were closing in. Tucker nodded, setting down her bundles. Mrs. Whitman runs a respectable establishment. You'll be safe here. There was an awkward moment of silence, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye to someone who had briefly but intensely entered their life. Well, Tucker said finally, I should get going if I want to make it home before dark. He extended his hand. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Ramirez, despite the circumstances. Zara took his hand, surprised by the warmth that traveled up her arm at his touch. Likewise, Mr. Ziegler. With a final nod, Tucker left. Zara watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, leading Daisy behind him. Only when he disappeared around a corner did she allow herself to sink onto the bed, the full weight of her solitude pressing down on her once more. The next week passed in a blur of polite interactions and sleepless nights. Mrs. Whitman was kind in her brusque way, and the other boarders, 2 elderly sisters and a young schoolteacher, were welcoming enough. Zara inquired about work and was offered a position at the general store, starting the following Monday. On Sunday, she attended church, sitting in the back row and slipping out before anyone could engage her in conversation. The town was as Tucker had described decent people leading ordinary lives. Yet Zara felt like a ghost among them, present but not participating. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Zara unfolded Tucker's directions for the 100th time. The paper had become worn at the creases, the handwriting familiar now. She had memorized every word, could picture the route clearly in her mind. The thought of the ranch, with its open spaces and the promise of companionship that asked nothing of her, had become a comfort during restless nights. Monday morning dawned clear and bright. Zara dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, preparing for her first day at the general store. As she pinned her hair, there was a knock at her door. "Mrs. Ramirez," Mrs. Whitman called, "you have a visitor downstairs." Puzzled, Zara finished quickly and made her way to the boarding house's small parlor. Standing by the window, hat in hand, was Tucker Ziegler. "Mr. Ziegler," Zara said, unable to hide her surprise. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." Tucker turned, a hesitant smile crossing his face. "Mrs. Ramirez, you're looking well." He did too, Zara thought. Cleaner than when she'd last seen him, dressed in a fresh shirt and his best jeans, his dark hair neatly combed. "What brings you to town?" she asked, conscious of Mrs. Whitman hovering nearby, ears practically visible. "Business at the bank," Tucker replied, "and I wanted to check how you were settling in." "I'm fine," Zara said automatically. "Starting work at the general store today, in fact." Tucker nodded, seeming genuinely pleased. "That's good news. Mr. Davis is fair-minded. It's a good place to work." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. "Would you care to walk with me?" Tucker finally asked. "Just down the street and back. The day's too fine to spend indoors." Zara glanced at Mrs. Whitman, who made a shooing gesture. "Go on, dear. You have time before you're due at the store." Outside, the morning sunshine bathed the street in golden light. They walked slowly, side by side but not touching, nodding to passers-by. "How is your sister?" Zara asked, searching for safe conversation. "Caroline's well. She asked me to extend her invitation again. Says the house could use a woman's touch besides her own." Tucker smiled slightly. "Her words, not mine," Zara nodded, touched by the gesture. "Please thank her for me." They continued walking, the silence between them more comfortable now. At the end of the main street, they stopped and turned back. "In truth, Mrs. Ramirez," Tucker said suddenly, "I came to town specifically to see you." Zara looked up at him, surprised by his directness. "I know we barely know each other," he continued, "and you have every reason to be cautious. But in the week since I left you here, I've found myself thinking of you often. Wondering how you're faring, if you're truly all right." His honesty was disarming. "I'm managing," Zara replied carefully. Tucker nodded, accepting her reserve. "Of course. I just wanted you to know that my offer of sanctuary still stands. Not out of pity or obligation, but because He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Because I feel a connection to you that I can't quite explain, and I think perhaps you might feel it too." Zara's heart quickened, both in fear and something else she wasn't ready to name. "Mr. Ziegler, I've buried 2 husbands. I'm not looking for a third." Tucker's expression remained steady. "I'm not proposing marriage, Mrs. Ramirez, just friendship for now, a safe place to heal, the rest." He shrugged. "The rest is up to fate. They had reached the boarding house again. Tucker stopped, turning to face her fully. "I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon. If you decide you'd like to come to the ranch, even just to visit, I'll be at the saloon around noon." He placed his hat back on his head. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Zara to watch his retreating back for the second time. Her day at the general store passed in a fog, her mind constantly returning to Tucker's words. Mr. Davis was indeed fair and patient, showing her the inventory system and introducing her to regular customers. By closing time, Zara had performed adequately, though her thoughts had been elsewhere. That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She lay awake, weighing her options. The boarding house was safe but sterile. The job at the store would provide income but little fulfillment. Silverdale could become home in time, but right now it felt like just another place to exist rather than live. And then there was Tucker Ziegler, with his steady gaze and careful words. A man who had helped without question, who offered connection without demand. A man who drew water from a well beside her husband's grave and somehow made her feel that life might continue after all. Morning came, and with it, decision. Zara dressed carefully, packed her few belongings, and went downstairs to speak with Mrs. Whitman. "Leaving already?" the older woman asked, not unkindly. "I had a feeling when I saw Mr. Ziegler yesterday." "It's not what you think," Zara said quickly. "His sister needs help at their ranch." "It's just temporary." Mrs. Whitman's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "Of course, dear, Mr. Davis will be disappointed, but he'll understand." By noon, Zara had settled her account at the boarding house, explained her departure to Mr. Davis, and made her way to the saloon. She paused outside, gathering her courage, then pushed through the swinging doors. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. A few men sat at scattered tables, nursing drinks despite the early hour. In a corner, nursing a coffee rather than whiskey, sat Tucker. He looked up as she approached, surprise and then pleasure crossing his features. "Mrs. Ramirez, Mr. Ziegler." Zara set her bag on the floor beside his table. "I've been thinking about your offer." Tucker gestured to the chair across from him, and Zara sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I'd like to accept if it's still open, just until I decide what's next." The smile that spread across Tucker's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "It's still open. Caroline will be delighted." They left town an hour later, Zara once again riding Daisy. This time, however, they rode side by side rather than in single file, and their conversation flowed more easily. Tucker told her about the cattle he was raising, his plans to expand into horses next year, the improvements he was making to the house. "It's nothing fancy," he warned. "Built it myself, and I'm no master carpenter, but it's solid and warm." "That's all a house needs to be," Zara replied, thinking of the humble cabins she had shared with her husbands. The journey took just over 3 hours, the landscape becoming more varied and lush as they traveled northeast. Finally, they crested a hill, and Tucker's ranch came into view below a modest but well-maintained operation spread across a verdant valley with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. "There it is," Tucker said, a note of pride in his voice. "Ziegler Ranch." The main house was larger than Zara had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and numerous windows. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. As they approached, the front door opened, and a woman emerged onto the porch. Caroline Ziegler bore a striking resemblance to her brother, the same stormy eyes and strong features, though her dark hair was streaked with premature silver. She waved enthusiastically as they rode into the yard. "Finally," she called. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind, Tucker." Tucker dismounted and helped Zara down, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. "Mrs. Ramirez, this is my sister, Caroline. Caroline, Mrs. Zara Ramirez." Caroline stepped forward, taking Zara's hands in hers. Please call me Caroline, and may I call you Zara? Mrs. Ramirez is so formal, and if we're to be housemates, we should be friends. Zara nodded, somewhat overwhelmed by the warm welcome. Zara is fine. Wonderful. Come inside. You must be exhausted and dinner's almost ready. Tucker, see to the horses, will you? And wash up properly before you come in. No trail dust at my table. Tucker rolled his eyes good-naturedly at his sister's fussing but complied, leading the horses toward the barn. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and touches of home curtains at the windows, a quilt on the sofa, wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. Caroline showed Zara to a bedroom on the second floor, a pleasant space with a double bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. Tucker built that chair for me when I first came west, Caroline explained. Said every woman needs a place to sit and think. She patted the quilt on the bed. Take some time to settle in. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Left alone, Zara unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. The room was larger than any she had occupied in years, certainly more comfortable than her space at the boarding house. There was even a small bookshelf with several volumes, novels, poetry, a Bible. When she went downstairs, she found Caroline in the kitchen and offered to help. Together, they finished preparing a meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Tucker joined them just as they were setting the table, his hair damp from washing up, wearing a clean shirt. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Caroline carried much of the conversation, telling stories about their childhood in Pennsylvania and their early days in Colorado. Tucker occasionally interjected with corrections or additions, his deep laugh filling the room when Caroline exaggerated for effect. Tucker tells me you're quite resourceful, Caroline said to Zara as they cleared the plates. Surviving alone after bandits attacked, that takes courage. Or desperation, Zara replied quietly. Sometimes they're the same thing, Caroline said wisely. Later, as twilight descended, the three sat on the porch. Tucker and Caroline in rocking chairs, Zara on the porch steps. The air was cool but pleasant, filled with the sounds of night birds and distant lowing of cattle. It's peaceful here, Zara observed, watching as the first stars appeared. That's why we came, Tucker said. After the war, all I wanted was quiet and space to breathe. You fought. Zara asked, realizing how little she knew about him. Tucker nodded, his expression clouding slightly. Union Army. 4 years that felt like 40. Caroline reached over to squeeze her brother's hand, a gesture of shared understanding. We lost our parents during the war, illness, not violence. Afterward, there wasn't much left for us in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, Zara said, recognizing the familiar weight of loss in their voices. Life continues, Tucker said simply. We adapt or we perish. The days that followed established a rhythm. Zara helped Caroline with household tasks and gradually began assisting with the ranch's bookkeeping, discovering a talent for numbers she hadn't known she possessed. Tucker spent his days working with the cattle and making improvements to the property, returning in the evenings tired but satisfied. They ate meals together, sharing stories and observations. Tucker was quieter than his sister but attentive, his eyes often finding Zara across the table or the room. His gaze never made her uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like a gentle affirmation of her presence, an acknowledgement that he truly saw her in a world where she had often felt invisible. Weeks passed, and summer gave way to early autumn. The temporary arrangement began to feel increasingly permanent, though Zara and Tucker never discussed it directly. Caroline, however, was less circumspect. My brother watches you like you're the sunrise, she remarked one afternoon as they hung laundry on the line. I haven't seen that look on his face since before the war. Zara felt her cheeks warm. We're just friends, Caroline. Of course, the older woman agreed too readily, and the sky isn't blue. The subject wasn't raised again, but Zara found herself increasingly aware of Tucker's presence, the way her pulse quickened when their hands brushed, the comfort she felt in his company. She hadn't expected to feel this way again, had believed that part of her died with her husband's. Yet here it was, blooming like wildflowers after rain. One evening in late September, Tucker found Zara alone on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. "Mind some company?" he asked. Holding 2 mugs of coffee, Zara shifted on the bench, making room for him. "Not at all." They sat in companionable silence, sipping the hot coffee and watching as the last light faded from the sky. Finally, Tucker spoke, his voice low and measured. "You've been here almost 2 months now." "Yes," Zara agreed, wondering if this was his way of asking when she planned to leave. "Are you happy here, Zara?" The question caught her off guard, both for its directness and for his use of her first name, something he had carefully avoided until now. "Yes," she said honestly. "Happier than I expected to be again." Tucker nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I found you at that well, you were waiting, not just for rescue, but for a sign that life had meaning beyond survival." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I was waiting too, though I didn't know it until I met you." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. "What were you waiting for, Tucker?" For someone who understood that life is fragile but worth fighting for, someone who had seen darkness but still believed in light. His hand found hers on the bench between them. "Someone like you." Zara looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, her smaller but equally work-worn. Hands that had buried loved ones, drawn water from wells, built lives from nothing. Hands that might, together, build something lasting. "I'm not looking for another husband to depend on," she said carefully. "And I'm not looking for a wife to protect," Tucker replied. "I'm looking for a partner to stand beside." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Zara didn't move, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle but certain, like a promise made in daylight rather than dreams. When they parted, Zara saw her own wonder reflected in Tucker's eyes. "I never expected this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But sometimes the unexpected is exactly what we need." Inside the house, a lamp was lit, and they could see Caroline moving about the kitchen, preparing the evening meal. The scene was ordinary, domestic, and somehow extraordinary in its simple rightness. "Stay," Tucker said softly. "Not as our guest, as part of this place, part of—" He hesitated, then finished, "part of me." Zara thought of the well where she had waited, hungry and alone, thought of the man who had drawn water and offered help without condition. Thought of the life she had begun to build here, unexpected but true. "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of all her past sorrows and future hopes. "I'll stay." Tucker's smile was like dawn breaking over the mountains. He stood, drawing her up with him, and together they walked toward the warm light of the house, no longer waiting, no longer hungry, no longer alone. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn day, Zara stood by the well Tucker had built beside their new home, a larger house constructed over the summer to accommodate their growing family. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movement of the child that would arrive before winter. Tucker approached, carrying a bucket of fresh water. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, setting it down beside her. Zara smiled, accepting the dipper he offered. The water was cool and clear, life-giving in its simplicity. "Remember when you found me, waiting by a different well?" Tucker nodded, his arm slipping around her waist. "How could I forget? You were the most beautiful, fierce thing I'd ever seen, half-starved but still fighting." "And now?" Zara asked, leaning into his embrace. Tucker's hand joined hers over their unborn child. "Now you're still beautiful and fierce, but you're not waiting anymore. Neither of us is." As if in agreement, the baby kicked against their joined hands, a reminder of life continuing, of futures unfolding. Behind them, their home stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney where Caroline was likely preparing dinner. Zara turned in Tucker's arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him, her partner, her love, the man who had drawn water when she was thirsty and offered life when she thought hers was over. "No more waiting," she agreed. "Just living, together." And as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Zara knew with bone-deep certainty that some wells never run dry, some loves never fade, and some lives, once joined, become something greater than their separate parts could ever be.